On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, hey, tanker Eagle S, you scratched my cable. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we've had a third incident of cables being severed in the Baltic. Back in October of 2023, you may remember, we had an incident involving the new polar bear breaking cables in this same area. We just last month had the accusation of the Peng 3. This is a Chinese bulker doing a similar issue. And now we have the accusation and a buttload of proof that the tanker Eagle S, a Cook Island tanker departing from Russia heading down to the Suez, is guilty of severing cables, both electrical cables and fiber optic cables between Finland and Estonia. We're going to look at the issues underlying this. Why are we seeing such an uptick right now in elements involving Russia and Russian shipping? And what does this all mean? If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. This is Eagle S at anchor in Finnish waters. We're going to take a look at the track line here in a minute. The ship was in Finland waters when Finland security forces seized the vessel, forced the ship to anchor to inspect it based on the ship's track and accusations that the ship had dragged one of its anchors and severed cables. Images came out of Finnish security forces rappelling down to the vessel. These are perhaps the most incriminating images. This is images of Eagle S at anchor. You can see the starboard anchor is down, but in case you don't note it, the ship is missing its port anchor. That is not normal. The ship has to sail with two anchors. That's it. Hey, hope you enjoyed today's video. No, I'm kidding. But that's pretty much the evidence you need. The ship is missing an anchor. That's not something that just happens. When you leave port, you have two anchors. And to lose an anchor is a substantial issue. And what we've seen in the past, especially with the new polar bear, was that the ship's anchor was dragged. We know that because we have the anchor. We saw the evidence from the anchor. This is pretty damning that the Eagle S is missing an anchor. The initial reports said there were indications that this vessel was involved. I don't think you get a better indication than that the ship has lost an anchor. Now, let me be clear. Losing an anchor is an unusual thing, and these ships seem to have an unusual knack for losing anchors in the Baltic. So let's take a moment and take a look at this and break this down a little bit more. So let's go over to marine traffic. This is the data for the Eagle S, a crude oil tanker outbound from the St. Petersburg anchorage heading over to the Suez Canal. The ship was built in 2006, 18 years old. It's sailing under the registry of the Cook Islands, 74,000-ton tanker, reported draft of 12.6 meters, length overall of 228.6 meters, and a width of 32.57 meters. Now, this vessel is operating under what is referred to as the Dark Fleet, or what I like to call the Parallel Fleet. Since the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia has been under sanctions imposed by the G7 and the EU. We're going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit further in the video. However, one of the ways you identify a Dark Fleet tanker is the vessel tends to be over 15 years of age. The ship is registered in a country that has a lot of shakiness involved with it. The Cook Islands is one of those. It's not the standard registry for ships. It's not Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, which register over half the world's vessels. And you have a hard time identifying the owner and insurance for this vessel. And we're going to come back to that. So here's the track of Eagle S out of the St. Petersburg anchorage, leaving Russia, heading up into the channel and heading westbound out of the region in the Baltic. And it was just north of Tallinn and just south of Helsinki when the vessel was stopped by the Finns and ordered to anchor. Here's the ship at the anchorage right now. It is being monitored by two vessels. One of them, the Ursa, I am sorry, my Finnish is not great. A law enforcement vessel operated by Finland, and also the Turva, another patrol vessel of the Finnish security forces. Eagle herself is just here to the north of the main track line. You'll see the vessel right here. I'm going to zoom out. We're using marine traffic and it's a navigation feature. I want to show you this for a couple of reasons. I'm going to zoom out just a bit and then back in here to show you. So right here, this heavy purple line right here, this is the border. This is the EEZ border between Estonia and Finland. This is less than 12 miles from land. 12 miles under UNCLOS, this is the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, allows countries to claim those waters as territorial waters. Now, you have to allow free passage through it, but it's the right of what's called innocent passage. Innocent passage means you're just moving for commerce and moving goods. However, if a ship is believed to be in violation of innocent passage and within the territorial waters, then the nation who owns those waters, in this case Finland, has the right to board the vessel. They don't have to go to the Cook Islands to get permission to do it, and that is exactly what happens. This happens under an element called port state control. The other issue I want to show you is when we zoom in here, and I apologize, but I want to use the navigation chart here because it gives you everything. I want you to note the confused nature of the bottom of the Baltic. All these squiggly purple lines here are submarine cables. You can see how many of them are crisscrossing this area. The dots with the dash lines on it, those are pipelines. That's probably actually Nord Stream 1 and 2 you see right there. Now, you're going to sit there and say to me, Sal, why the hell are we showing undersea cables and pipelines on navigation charts? Understand, the main issue with undersea cables and pipelines is ships accidentally anchoring on top of them. It's accidents, and so you mark them on charts so ships accidentally don't do this. And if you don't believe it happens, just go look up Tonga, and you'll find out that back in 2019, Tonga lost all its connection to the outside world because a ship accidentally anchored and severed the sole internet cable connecting Tonga to the outside world. It does happen. And so you have them marked on the charts. So it's not hard to identify these cables. It's also one of the reasons why the cables are of such risk, and there's a renewed interest in really patrolling them, making sure they're safe. All right, we're going to run the voyage of Eagle S, departing from the anchorage off Ostlunga. This is the St. Petersburg anchorage, and the transit of the vessel out through the area. Now, the ship is going to follow a pretty standard route here, as you see. Traffic separation scheme, this is the purple lines here, so kind of like lanes in road. You'll see the ship is following a very set pattern here. Outbound, there would not be pilotage on board the vessel. This ship would be navigating by itself. The ship's crew would be doing this. Now, a lot of questions about the composition of this crew. Who is this crew? Who are the crew members on board? We haven't quite gotten that yet from the authorities who makes up this crew. You'll notice this ship passes repeatedly, and all ships do in the Baltic, over cables and pipelines. It's just the nature of the voyage. The thing to be looking here for is the speed of the vessel. The vessel is steaming at roughly about 11 to 12 knots, and you'll see the vessel slows down here now to about 8-7 knots. This is an area where there are a lot of cables. You'll see it come across. I'm going to back this back up again. Right here, you see the ship coming to an inflection, a crossing point of multiple cables here. At least 4 cables crossing here. The ship is heading at about 10 knots. Now, let me talk a little bit about an anchor drop before we go any further. So this image you're seeing here is a pretty standard orientation of a ship's anchor and anchor windlass. The bow would be to your left side, stern to the right side of what you're seeing here. The anchor comes up from below deck, down below this windlass, up and over the gypsy wheel, the gypsy head, out over here, and then down the hawse pipe. That is the pipe that goes out to the anchor itself, which is suspended above the bow, and then you drop it. Now, there's a couple of features here that prevent this anchor from going, 3 specifically, that you don't accidentally drop an anchor. Number 1 is the chain stopper. This is a physical chain stopper. This is an actual, basic clamp on the chain that prevents the anchor from dropping. Second, this is on a clutch. And so you have a clutch engage so that when you hoist it back aboard, you have to engage the windlass and it pulls it back up. So if your clutch is in, it's kind of like being in forward of your old stick shift car. You can't really go in reverse if you got it in forward. And so you engage the clutch and the clutch holds it. And then right here is the wheel. This is the brake. And that brake physically puts this big, huge metal strap on here, tightens it up, and holds it in place. So you have 3 systems that hold that anchor so that you can't drop it. Now, can you accidentally drop an anchor? Yes. If you are not careful, if, for example, the chain stopper is off, the clutch isn't engaged, and the brake begins to loosen, then you can start lowering an anchor by accident. Typically doesn't happen because it makes a lot of noise when you drop an anchor. Plus, you tend to see results of your ship being pulled and dragged. Understand, an anchor is not going to stop you at speed. It is not like the movie Battleship where they swing the Missouri around. That's not, an anchor is designed to hold you in place when the ship is not moving. That's the thing. It creates, and believe it or not, the anchor isn't what holds you. It's the chain that's laid out from the anchor on top of the anchor itself that holds you in place. When you're moving at 10 knots, there ain't no anchor in the world that's going to stop you from moving. All right, let's go back to marine traffic. So Eagle S is coming up on the confluence of the cables. The ship is proceeding at about 11 to 10 knots. If it is dragging its port anchor, that anchor is out at least, it has to be out over 70 meters of anchor. The ship usually will have somewhere in the range of 8 to 10 shots of anchor chain on board. That's roughly about 200 meters of anchor chain. It's about 90 feet a shot. I think it's about 23 meters per shot. And so you have 8 to 10 shots on board. So it would have its port anchor out, and basically what's happening is the chain and the anchor are skipping on the bottom. And as they come up here to the confluence of cables, it would hit. It would begin to strike, and you see the vessel slow down there. And I think that slowing down is a really good indication. Now, it does pass over the pipelines here too. And so it'll be some interesting indication of whether or not those pipelines were also damaged. So the question becomes now, do they do this on purpose or on accident? We don't know. But probably what begins to happen is the ship realizes, intentionally or unintentionally, they're dragging their anchor. And they're going to start hauling up on that anchor. That anchor windlass is designed to pull up the anchor when the ship is stationary. Matter of fact, what you do is you tend to walk your ship over the top of the anchor chain and pick it up. It is not designed to pick up the full length of the anchor chain, dragging behind you at speed. It doesn't have that ability to pull it up. That's a lot of force acting on the anchor chain. And as the ship is moving here and it's coming up over the 50-meter curves here, it's creating more and more force. And what we see is the ship begins to slow down here. It's slowing down to 7, eventually down to 6 knots, and it's going to come to a complete stop here. Why stop? It's probably not the anchor chain grabbing and stopping the vessel. This is the ship intentionally slowing down. I think they realize they can't pull their anchor chain up because of the drag that's associated with it. And so they come to a stop. And what's really interesting is the ship begins to kind of drift backwards, turns around like it's tracing back over the anchor chain to pick it up. And it may be that the anchor windlass is so damaged or the chain is unable to be pulled up that they either decide to let the entire chain go, in other words, just let it spill out, or the chain snapped and broke. And the ship proceeded on, either to continue on, so not as to get noticed by anybody, because that's going to get grabbed. I mean, people are going to see the ship going back and forth. There were some reports that's where the ship grabbed the cables. No, that's where it came up over the 50-meter depth, and probably where they tried to pull the anchor up. I'm going to assume that's where they're going to find the anchor, right there. That's going to be the spot where the anchor is going to be kind of present more than ever. And the ship continues on its path, as you see here. The ship gets back up to speed, roughly around 8-9 knots, and is heading westbound. Now, was there communication between the ship and authorities? We don't know. What we do know is that the ship is going to keep proceeding on here till it reaches this point when the ship is going to stop, because what we do see is the ship take its way off. You'll see this ship begin now to slow down. Probably was boarded just around this period. She's going to come to a stop now, drift for a little bit. She's going to drift back here, and then she's going to get underway and then come out of the main shipping channel and eventually anchor in a position up here a little bit closer into Finnish waters. and that is where the ship remains at this time, anchored pretty close into Finland, still within territorial waters. The ship never left Finnish territorial waters. There's also an indication that this ship was involved in more than just perhaps the anchor train drop. This is a story over from Lloyd's List, Michelle Weiss-Bachmann, who's a fantastic reporter. If you have a chance to follow Lloyd's List, you should follow them. But Michelle Weiss-Bachmann, one of my favorite Australians, put this story out. Russia-linked cable-cutting tanker seized by Finland, quote, was loaded with spying equipment. Listening equipment was placed on Eagle S and a related tanker, the Swift Sea Rider, to monitor NATO naval and aircraft activities, Lloyd's List was told. This goes on. Eagle S, the Russia-linked tanker suspected of damaging an underwater electricity cable on Christmas Day, was kitted out with special transmitting and receiving devices that were used to monitor naval activity, according to a source with direct involvement in the ship, which has since been detained by the Finnish police. I'll have a link to this story because this story is out beyond the paywall of Lloyd's List. It's a really good story. I very much recommend it. You'll see it in the show notes. As I mentioned before, this is not the first instance of a broken cable in this region. Back in October, the New Polar Bear had an anchor drag and severed a cable. I did a video on it where I talked about it, how the anchor basically fell off and was dragged at the time. This image that I have here actually shows the New Polar Bear coming into port after that event. You'll notice it has a partial container collapse on board. We're not sure if this was deliberate with the New Polar Bear or accidental. This is a ship that just had taken the new Arctic route across. There was a lot of press about the vessel. However, it may have given the Russians and other players the idea that this was a potential means to do a cable attack. We then had the issue just recently with the Peng 3. This ship was suspected of causing two breakages in the Baltic Sea of cables leading to Sweden. The Swedish police were allowed to board the vessel, but the ship had sailed out of Swedish waters and was actually stopped in a little pocket of international waters between Denmark and Sweden. Sweden was allowed to board along with Chinese authorities. However, there was no evidence, or at least not enough evidence, to hold the vessel, and Yiping 3 was allowed to sail. The root cause of this, the most recent breakages, the one with Yiping 3 and now with Eagle S, may be caused by Russia bribing or inciting the crews on board these vessels to undertake these missions, or it could be Russians organizing these attacks against cables, largely the Sweden and Finland and the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, because of those nations' support toward Ukraine and the recent ascension of both Sweden and Finland into NATO. So you're starting to see stories like this: NATO to boost Baltic Sea presence after power internet cable damage. This is all preceded by recently a series of losses to the Russian commercial merchant marine. The cargo ship Ursa Major, which is leased to the Russian military. It's owned by a Russian military company. Flagged in Russia. It is, again, another one of these dark fleet or parallel fleet ships we're going to talk about. This ship specifically is under OFAC. This is the Office of Foreign Asset Control sanctions. This ship suffered an explosion in the engine room in the Western Mediterranean and subsequently sunk. Russia is now saying the ship was a subject of terrorist attack. These Russian ship losses, I've documented them. I've done a series of videos on them. The very first Russian ship losses were in the Black Sea to the Volganev 212 and 239. Then they lost the Volganev 109 up in the Sea of Azov. And then we had the sinking of Ursa Major. So the justification for Finland to board this vessel has come under question also. There was a series of international treaties regarding submarine cables. It actually goes all the way back to 1888 with the International Convention for the Protection of Submarine Telegraph Cables. This website, I'll have the link for you on the show notes, comes from NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, probably one of the best sites on there. Under the 1888 International Convention, a warship or ship of a nation has a right to board a vessel if it suspects the vessel of damaging or accidentally or intentionally damaging their cables. I should note, however, this section right here, the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, to which the U.S. is not yet a part, incorporates the submarine cable protections of the previous treaties and clarifies other relevant matters. However, UNCLOS does not incorporate certain provisions of the Paris Convention, such as the reference to civil liability for cable breakages and provisions allowing the boarding and inspection at sea of vessels suspected of willful or negligent damage to cables. So can Finland legally board the Eagle-S, which is a Cook Island flight? The Cook Islands are out in the middle of the Pacific, but more importantly, they're a open registry that's being used by the parallel/dark fleet. And the answer is yes. Under UNCLOS, this is territorial waters of Finland. You're within 12 nautical miles of the Finnish coast. And through port state control, you can board this vessel. And that is what Finland has done. And plus, we don't know whether the ship intentionally, purposely stopped and allowed the boarding to take place. We really haven't heard from the crew on this. So let's delve into the issue of the dark fleet and why there is a dark fleet in the first place. Ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the G7 nations, along with the European Union and several other nations, Australia and a few others, have imposed sanctions against Russia. In particularly, one of the things they have sanctioned is the export of Russian oil and diesel fuel. And the G7 and the EU wanted the best of both worlds. They wanted that sweet, delicious Russian crude and diesel, but at the same time, they wanted to hurt Russia. And so what they did is they put a price cap on the export of Russian crude and diesel. $60 a barrel for crude, $100 a barrel for diesel fuel. And the method they used to impose this was the existing regulations of shipping, in particularly the P&I clubs. P&I clubs are the protection and indemnity clubs. There are a dozen of these clubs, largely focused within the kind of the first world nations. I hate to use that phrase, but it's in the United States, it's in Europe, it's in Japan, it's in Korea. It's in nations that are really on the top tier. I hate this phrase, but this is the way they do it. What the shadow fleet, the dark fleet, the parallel fleet has done, what the Russians have done to get away from this, is they have sought registering their ships in countries other than the normal ones, Cook Island, for example. They're doing it with older ships, usually ships over 15 years of age. This ship is 18. They have also gone outside the normal classification societies. These are the third-party agencies that classify vessels. And then they get insurance outside the region, if they even do get insurance. So when we look at this vessel, Eagle-S, it rings all those bells. So, for example, when you look at the beneficial owner for this ship, it is a beneficial owner out of the United Arab Emirates. Carvala LLC FZ. There are a lot of Russian companies that have moved over to this United Arab Emirates, and we can see that there. The classification society is the Indian Register of Shipping. This vessel previously was registered with the American Bureau of Shipping. Now it's under Indian registry because this ship hauls oil largely to and from India. It shows it's under the UK P&I Club. However, when you do a search over at UK P&I with the IMO number, the IMO number is the number that's attached to every vessel. You can't change that. That's a standard number that's assigned to every vessel. You come up here and there's no record of this ship being with the UK P&I Club, meaning it is not having insurance through that entity. When we go over to Equasis is a ship database on vessels. You'll notice a couple of things about the Eagle-S. Number one, the ship has been black flagged by the Tokyo MOU. The MOUs are port state control. These are the entities that board vessels in foreign countries to ensure they're meeting international standards. Tokyo giving it a black flag means the ship is in violation of certain key areas. The Paris MOU, which covers Europe, has it given a gray. The ship was withdrawn from the American Bureau of Shipping in September of 2024 and entered into the Indian Registry of Shipping. When you look at inspections for Eagle S, you see a lot of red flags regarding this vessel. So the last time this ship underwent an inspection was September of 2023. So we're talking about over a year ago. That's a long time for a ship to go without an inspection. And it was done under the Abuja MOU over in Ghana. Found 24 deficiencies for this vessel. Just looking at the ones that were grounds for detention, in other words, not allowing the ship to sail, issues with the emergency fire pumps and its pipes, emergency source of power, the emergency generator, fire detection and alarm systems, and the maintenance of ship and equipment. If you go by deficiencies in categories, you can see documentation, the oil record book, emergency systems, abandoned ship drills, security-related matters, MARPOL, which is the Marine Pollution Act, issues with oil filtering, sewage treatment, exhaust gas, safety of navigation issues, I mean, watertight conditions on the vessel, cleanliness, you name it. This ship is flying red flags everywhere. And so, did the Russians pay off the crew on Eagle S to do this? Potentially, because this is a ship that's in pretty poor condition based on the inspections done by Ghana, let alone when you start peeling back here a little bit further, you start seeing more issues with it. This ship could have been used by the Russians to, again, disrupt cables between Estonia and Finland, two countries it does not have great relations with. Finland for joining NATO, which now extends the NATO border against Russia longer than it's ever been. Finland has a huge border with them. The Finns and the Russians don't exactly get along very well. Look up the Winter War of 1940. It's not a great period of time for the Russians. And you're having issues over support for Ukraine. I think one of the things we have to start looking at, and again, I just did the video on the Ursa Major, where I said it is probably a maintenance issue, more than likely because of deferred maintenance and the ship being under sanctions. However, if you start talking about gray zone operations here, where, maybe there are forces at play here, man, there's a lot of things I start becoming concerned with. I don't have any evidence of it. Let's be clear about that. I don't have the evidence. I'm not going to be one who sits there and says, exactly, this is what it is, 100%. I don't have the evidence with it. I'm going to lay it out here for you, and you start making your judgments. However, when you start seeing ships sinking at the rate the Russians are losing them, now let me be clear, the Russians could lose ships like this all the time. They're terrible with maintenance. You don't bring 3 river tankers out into the Black Sea in a gale. I mean, they're 50-year-old tankers. They're going to sink. I don't think those were targeted by the Ukrainians. I think that's pure maintenance. Ursa Major, could that have been sabotaged? Of course it could be sabotaged, but I also think that the ship could have suffered a mechanical issue. However, this issue with the Eagle S dragging its anchor, that is unusual. You may get a single anchor drag like you had with New Polar Bear. However, 3 times with this in the Baltic, between Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Germany, countries that Russia has a big problem with, I think maybe New Polar Bear gave them an idea, and they are looking for susceptible crews or companies or putting people on board to do this. And I'm going to be really interested to what the Finns discover from their search on board Eagle S. What happened and where is that missing anchor? Remember, there's supposed to be an anchor in that hole, and there's no anchor there. And that is a pretty damning signal that Eagle S was involved in this cable cut. I'm sure we're going to recover the anchor. Anchor will be stamped with numbers so that you can trace it back to the ship. There will be indications. I'm interested if the entire chain ran out of the vessel. In other words, did it spill out entirely? Is part of the chain housed back in the vessel? Believe it or not, anchor chains are not physically attached to the ship. There's kind of a very loose connection to it. But what holds the anchor chain in place on a ship is the weight on top of the windlass actually pulling down on it. It'll be interesting to see what happened, what's the crew testimony to it, what does the physical evidence look like on the ship, and what do they do with this vessel? The Finns have every right to arrest this vessel, sell the cargo and the ship to get restitution, because I can guarantee you when they go back and follow that company back to the UAE, there's going to be nothing at that end. There's going to be no money, no issue, no assets, no nothing. And so using ships in this type of gray zone warfare is a potential new threat. I think the Baltic is about to become as volatile as the Black Sea and the Red Sea is happening. And understand, as the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and now the Baltic Sea become riled up, this is going to have impacts on the Blue Sea, the transoceanic movements. This is all happening at the same time. We need to be cognizant of what is happening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. We are now on all social media platforms, Twitter and Bluesky, which is really annoying. Can I be clear? I hate being on multiple social platforms, but that's what we do, I guess. And then I am also putting these episodes up on Spotify as podcasts a few days after they broadcast. I hope you had a great holiday season, whatever holiday you celebrated, and we're coming up on the new year. So looking forward to it. Got some good New Year episodes coming up, talking about the year in review, what to expect in 2025. I have no freaking idea what to expect in 2025. Good God. Every time I think this is getting better, it gets worse. Started this in 2022, and it's like, it couldn't get worse, could it? It's gotten worse. Gotten worse. There is a lot of ship going on, and I am here to cover it for you. That's right. I am the ship master. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.